in Lebanon. I'm working as a journalist. And I'm mostly covering Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Cyprus occasionally. On a day-to-day basis, my day is split pretty evenly between meeting and talking to sources, whether that be over the phone, on WhatsApp, or meeting in person, and writing articles. Yeah, and before that, I kind of started once I left UF, like Dr. Karras said, right after I graduated, I got a Bourne scholarship, which I recommend to anyone who's trying to work on critical languages. So I got a scholarship to go to Jordan for a year to study Arabic, colloquial Arabic, for about a year. And then after the year was over, I got a job working at an organization called Syria Direct, which was based in Amman. And they covered Syria exclusively. And I worked there for 2 years, and then moved to Doha, worked with Al Jazeera for a bit, and then moved to Beirut, where I am now. That's kind of the overview. But I would say that, kind of key to all this for me has been 3 things. The first is language. And this doesn't apply everywhere, but I found particularly in the Middle East, having some sort of basis in Arabic helps a lot, because not only does it help you in your day-to-day life and you get to communicate with people and have all the sorts of meaningful experiences you want to have while you're abroad, but also it helps you sort of create a niche for yourself and give you a hard skill when you're looking for a job. And in a career like journalism, where there's not a lot of job opportunities, but a lot of people that want to work in journalism, having a hard skill that sort of defines yourself, like Arabic, helps. And also, when you're in the field, you don't need a translator. So that's been quite helpful. The second thing is just sort of putting yourself out there. And that's vague, and I can't really elaborate more than that. But like, for example, when I started working at Syria Direct, the way that happened is Columbia University, they have a satellite campus in Amman. And I used to go there for talks all the time. And near the end of my scholarship period, I was talking to some guy, and someone from across the room heard my very obnoxiously loud American accent, came up to me and said, "Oh, are you American?" And fearing the worst, I was like, "Yes." But then he was like, "Oh, I'm writing a book about the Iraq War from Americans. Can you help me edit it? Because I want to see what Americans think." So started working with this guy. And it turns out he was like an accomplished journalist in the Middle East, and he had founded Syria Direct. And after working with him for a while, I asked him, like, could I maybe work for you guys? And he gave me an interview, and that's how everything happened. And the same thing with Al Jazeera, one person leads to another, something leads to another. And then, I guess the last sort of thing I'll leave you with is sort of, realize why you went abroad. For me, for example, I know a lot of people who are abroad, but they're doing the same day-to-day job they could be doing at home. So they happen to be abroad, but they're working on an Excel worksheet all day, which is fine. But I knew that there was something, being abroad that appealed to me. The thing that appealed to me about being abroad was the adventure, for example. And I remember when I was living in Doha and I was working with Al Jazeera, I was talking to someone who's much more established than me, maybe, let's say, a journalist 15 years my elder, so more down the line of the career. And I asked him, I said, what's your piece of advice for me, someone who was then 24 years old? And he looked at me and he said, "You should not be at Al Jazeera right now. Like, this is not the time for you to be there. You should be somewhere very small that nobody knows about, that has no resources, so that you can really work on yourself and have the adventures and whatever. And then when you have kids and like you want it to be a little bit easier and you want to sort of put down roots, come to Al Jazeera." Which is not to say that that's why you go to Al Jazeera, because it's definitely not. But the message was, while you're young, go out there and learn a lot of things, and then come back for the stability, and using those skills sort of, then you can apply them in the workplace, which I found to be true. After leaving Doha, which is a great place, I probably progressed more as a journalist in the last 6 months than I have in the last 2 years. So if you can sort of extract meaning from that, from whatever field you're looking at, that'd be good. And that's my introduction.
Thank you. Corrado.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see indeed so many people, and thank you, Will. Really, really interesting and cool story. So I'll quickly introduce myself, and I think for my story to make sense, I have to go back quite a bit. So I have to say my story with living and studying abroad began actually in the US, because I'm from Venezuela. And I moved to the US in 2017. I got into this program called United World College. I don't know if there's maybe any UWC Davis scholars in the audience. If so, great. I lived in New Mexico for 2 years doing this program, after which I came to UF to continue, say, my international experience in the US. So fast forward to 2014, 2015, I was in my last year at UF, and I was trying to decide what to do next. And among the options was the opportunity to look for a master's degree in Europe. For me, this made a lot of sense because I am European. I'm also Italian and Venezuelan. So this is also a possibility that I kept at the back of my head, the possibility of going to Europe, and that's how I found, looking for master's degrees in Europe, I found Central European University, and I got a really good offer from them for a program that I really that matched what I was looking for at the time. Essentially, I wanted a program that was flexible in terms of what I could learn, and also with a lot of orientation towards gaining applied knowledge, because political science and Chinese are, let's say, a bit of softer disciplines, and I was looking to gain more hard skills and something that would orient me in a specific direction towards the job market. And this was a very, actually one of the most difficult points in my life, because I felt really at home in Florida, even though I was, still very much a foreigner. I felt really at home, and it was a really difficult decision to make. And I was talking to my mentors at the time, among them Dr. Leverty, who used to work at the Graham Center. And the decision at the time made it, somebody with a lot more experience, made it seem very clear that this was such a great opportunity, and I would be ashamed if I wouldn't take it. So I moved to Hungary in 2015, and this is something that I never thought I wanted to do. It was not a goal for me to move to Hungary, particularly, but I'm so happy I did, because it took me to a part of the world that indeed I never actually really wanted to go to, but it's a very interesting one, which is the post-Eastern Bloc. So at CEU, which is also a very internationally oriented university, I studied public administration, but in practice, I focus a lot on public finance, which links back to a lot of what I learned in Florida through the Tallahassee internship program, also through the Graham Center. And I gained some work experience also in Budapest, but most importantly is I met my girlfriend, and my girlfriend is Dutch. And after she graduated, which was a year before I graduated, she moved to the Netherlands, and then the year after I followed her. So there's basically a lot of serendipity in how my career has gone and how my moves have gone. But I did move to the Netherlands, not only for her, but also because I found a job that was essentially my dream job at the moment. And that brings me to what I do now, which is I am a consultant in the field of international development. More specifically, what I do is I work with foreign governments in developing countries, mainly Africa, in improving public finance in these countries. So improving how money is managed, and not so much what is done with the money, but how is it managed? How can you make the most out of the resources that you have? And that means my current job also takes me around the world quite a bit. I mainly work in East Africa. So right now, I mainly work in Ethiopia right now, but I've also worked in Kenya, Uganda, and Jordan in the Middle East. And that is what I do right now. For me, working and living abroad is, I wouldn't have it any other way, to be honest. Since I left my hometown, I've only experienced, my life has only gotten better, and I've only grown and felt more at home in other places. So it's something that I would highly recommend to anyone to try it out. in terms of what has been helpful for me in this process, I would say I got a really good piece of advice right before I left home, which is that life is like a river, and you have to go with the current. You can't be fighting who you are and what you're drawn towards. You kind of have to go with that, and within that you can see what the obstacles are or what works better for you. So I have basically tried to go with my own flow, which is in this direction of public affairs and international work, and that's made me very happy.
Wonderful. Thank you both for the introductions and for revealing some of the details of your life and employment. We would like to open up the forum here for questions, and those questions can come from anyone tuning in over Zoom. They can come from anyone here in the audience. I invite you to use the feature on Zoom to raise your hand, and you can unmute yourself and ask the question. You're also welcome to type in some questions into chat, but of course, we'd always love to hear your voice. So if you have a question, raising your hand virtually is probably the best strategy. Anyone here have any questions for our participants? Is that a hand? Sorry. Yes, a question right here. Please.
So I was gonna ask, what are the main obstacles that you guys have faced, and what advice would you give for overcoming them?
Obstacles that you faced in your international endeavors and how you overcame them. Corrado, do you want to address the question?
Yeah, I think one thing that I found to be difficult is having like a lack of a network or lack of references. Say when you start over in a new country, you don't know anyone, you don't know really what is expected of you, and you lack a lot of the soft knowledge of how you carry yourself in a meeting, or what type of information are you supposed to share or not, what is nice or not. That I think that's quite difficult, and I find it very helpful for just do well to feel at home in one way or the other, and you don't have to feel like you're a local, but there's a point when you really get to feeling like you belong. I found it really helpful to be curious towards the people that you meet when you go to new places. In my experience, there's always one or two people out there who are very excited to show you around. I mean, that's been the case for me, certainly in Florida, as well as in Hungary or in the Netherlands. So connecting with people is very helpful, and it's inevitable to form prejudices, but try to set them aside to the extent that you can, and come in as unbiased a way as possible into the new culture. There's many things that if I go back to my framework, say as a Venezuelan or as an Americanized Venezuelan, which is what I felt like when I moved to Europe, there were many things that came across as arrogant or rude. If you manage to set that aside, then you really open yourself up to learning. But otherwise, you continue to be an other to people.
Thank you. Will, obstacles you might have encountered and how you overcame them?
Yeah, I would agree with what Corrado said. Starting over in a new country is always quite difficult. And the first few weeks you will feel awkward and you're going to make mistakes and maybe do some cultural faux pas. But those are going to become the funny stories you're going to tell later on to your friends. And they're, it's not often that you get to start over and not know anybody. It's not often that you get to feel this feeling of uncertainty and excitement and whatever. It can be like a little bit disconcerting, but at the same time, it's a feeling that, maybe you can appreciate as well. I would say another obstacle would be, it's in the same realm, but uncertainty and transience. Because when you're in a lot of these cities, and let's say some of your friends work in NGOs and whatever, there's a lot of transience in the people that you know. People are coming in and out and whatever. And there might be uncertainty in your future too. Do you know that your job is not going to take you to another city soon? Do you know that the situation in the country might not make it, feasible for you to live there and work there anymore? So it's definitely not as, sometimes it's hard to plan out over a 1 year period, or even a 6 month period. So you have to sort of be comfortable with that sort of thing. But like I said, again, that's a double-edged sword. If you kind of like the excitement of not knowing of who you're going to meet tomorrow, or you like new people coming in all the time, and you don't mind not being able to set down some roots, then it's a positive for you. Yeah.
Thank you. Very insightful. We have a question from Fidel. Fidel, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hi, my question is for Corrado. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So you said that you're working in East Africa with finances and how they're handled. Can you go into a bit more detail about that? Because my specialty or my regional specialty is Africa.
Great. Yeah, so let's see, where do I start with the work I do? I work on basically three types of projects. I either, as a researcher, I work on economic models and policy reviews, policy analysis, to basically, for instance, review how a government spends money on a specific sector, forecast how much money would be available for that sector going forward. Yeah, that type, or for instance, analyze how specific expenditure has an effect on say, equality, or yeah, this type of analysis. That's one of the types. The other type of work is I implement reforms themselves. So, for example, last year I was working with the Ministry of Finance in Ethiopia to deploy a new macroeconomic forecasting model. In very simple terms, what this does is it helps the government know how much money they will have at the end of the year, so they can plan through the year their expenditures, so that there's no surprises, so that they don't run short before the end of the year, or so that they don't have to go in extra debt before the year to cover their expenses. And the last other type of project that I do is evaluations, which is you come in and you look at a project that somebody else did, either a study or some kind of technical implementation, like say a new policy or a program that was put in place. And we look at what happened, and we try to see whether it made sense or not, and whether it was effective, whether it achieved what it was supposed to do or not. For context, and I don't want to go too deep into this, but I work for a private company, and we work for donor countries, so most likely European countries or the European Union itself, which are supporting specific goals in these specific countries. So our clients are, well, on the one hand, the European governments, on the other hand, also the African governments. I hope that answers the question. Feel free to follow up if there's anything specific you'd like to know.
It does, thank you. I do have a follow-up question that I hope isn't too controversial. But you said that it works with the EU as well as the African countries. And then my first thought is kind of neocolonialism, and how in certain Francophone countries, such as Senegal, they use the French franc, or the, what's it called, or the euro. How is that kind of a cognitive dissonance maybe for you? Because what you said private company, so I'm thinking they have their own private interests.
Yeah, yeah. So that is a good question, and also it demands like quite a long conversation. In short, what I can say is we fall somewhere in between. We do have a role in the system, essentially because we are a private company, but what we are in reality is just a collection of experts, people who know things that are helpful to the either, say in the case of this one specific project, they are helpful to the Ethiopian government because they don't have the expertise themselves and they need someone, or rather than they have requested someone to come in and provide this type of support to them. It is helpful to the European governments because they themselves, as civil servants, also have this type of expertise and everything in place to deliver this type of trainings and provide the type of support. So we fall somewhere in between. I can't really speak to the point about cognitive dissonance, as in we fall somewhere within these existing systems of relations that have, of course, developed from prior colonial times to now, which is more trade and aid relationships, and it is the aid system. I work in aid projects, international aid projects, but normally, they are delivered from requests from both sides. So it is both the intention of the European governments to provide support and also a request of the recipient governments. Otherwise, there's no sense on hiring us to do anything. Over.
Thank you. That's a very well-balanced answer, very diplomatic, and but you did address the question directly, so we appreciate that. Our next question comes from Brisa. Brisa, do you have a question for our panelists?
Yes, hi, thank you all for your presentations. My question is maybe not as fun as these last couple of questions, but I've been wondering how do taxes work when you're like an American citizen and you're living and working abroad on a visa?
How do taxes work? Okay, so a nuts and bolts sort of question.
Yeah, I mean, not specifics, of course, but just generally, like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated endeavor to work abroad, and I'm sure there's things, paperwork you have to sort out and think about the tax system in your home country and the country you find yourself in. Will, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, probably not any informative thoughts, but difficult. I know that, filing taxes is a couple of years. It depends on if you pay taxes in the host country. And if the host country you're with has a tax treaty with the US. Also depends if your income is above a certain threshold, right? So if you would have paid taxes in the US anyway. But I know in a number of countries, if the country has a tax treaty with the US and your employer is withholding money to pay taxes locally, then you probably don't have to pay in the US unless you make more than 100,000. I know this is being recorded, so you can't. It's not official advice. I would look it up yourself.
Right.
But I think the most helpful thing tax-wise, unless you're raking it in terms of salary, is there's very helpful like tax tools online. TurboTax, for example, has a free one that just fill in the boxes, whatever, and it's helpful. It's not too difficult.
Good, thank you. Let's move on to a new question. Ariana, you've had your hand up for a while patiently. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes. Hi.
She must have two devices open.
Is it better now?
We can manage. Go ahead and ask your question. It should be fine. We'll echo.
Okay, thank you for coming. I really enjoyed your presentation so far. What I wanted to ask is, given that you're American-born or an Americanized foreigner living abroad and moving to countries that have very diverse social groups, do you find it hard to not involve yourself in maybe the underlying or the more present social tensions that might exist between ethnic groups in these countries? Or do you find yourself that the way you're perceived is based on your Americanness or how much you've displayed that you are a foreigner in this country?
Great question. Do either of our panelists have some thoughts?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. That is a really good question and a very complicated question. Maybe just as complicated as the tax question. I think it's interesting because I can't speak to everywhere, but living in Arab countries, the Middle East, being a Westerner and an American presenting Westerner, American, you kind of float, but you don't really belong. And so people trust you with a lot of things because they can't get a read on you. And what this reminds me of is like, I had a friend who went to Cambridge and did not have a British accent. And apparently in Cambridge and the UK in general, when you hear someone's accent, you go, oh, they're from the North, so I'm going to assume X, Y, Z about them, and you place them within your like map of social relations. And they couldn't do that with her because she didn't have a British accent. So similarly, I've felt there's a similar sort of things in the Arab countries I've lived in. Now that's different in each country. Like in Jordan, for example, they really love Americans. So not only do you not fit in with the existing social structure, but also they're really eager to talk to you. In Lebanon, that's quite different because they're more used to foreigners and they've lived abroad and they speak different languages and more exposed to Western cultures. And also, I think because there's some sectarian tension sometimes, if you fit in as a Christian as opposed to a Muslim, that might sometimes like group you in with different people. But I think in general, my experience has been when you sort of float on the margins of whatever existing social structure there is, every side is more willing to take you in as a confidant, unless they think you're a spy. But in general, it gives you more access to people. And like, I've found that like oftentimes, because you don't exist in that social structure and there's not so much in the social consequences, like for example, in Jordan, for example, people tell me things all the time that they would never tell a lot of their friends because they knew that there wouldn't be the same social repercussions if it was exposed to their community, for example. I was kind of like a locked box, which was cool and educational from my point of view.
Thank you. Corrado, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, this is a very funny one for me because I've really felt this every time I've moved. When I moved from Venezuela to the US, I discovered that I was a Latino, for example, because I saw myself as white in Venezuela. And then I really kind of internalized that I'm Latino. Then I moved to Europe, and in Europe I'm white again. And that was that was a really funny transition. In Hungary, a lot of people thought I was Hungarian, which was great. It's nice to be perceived as one of the locals. And then I moved to the Netherlands, where I am perceived as Southern European, which is okay, it's fine. But indeed, it's when I say these things, they come loaded with a lot of how people interact with you. And in a way, being a foreigner, I can say a little bit of what's like in the Netherlands, actually. So in the Netherlands, everybody speaks English. Really, 95% of the population speaks English, and it's very easy to live here and not speak Dutch. And I feel that at the beginning, not really for me, because I have been here now for a while, and my partner is Dutch, so that means I'm a little bit more connected. But at first, it's very difficult to break into what's happening in society. And there's all these subcultures, and I think for most foreigners who live here, it's not very accessible, because there's a whole layer of society that just functions in English. And if you stay in that circle, you isolate yourself from everything that's happening in the country, and you may live here and you don't know anything that's happening here. Maybe it's a bit of a unique phenomenon or maybe, I don't know, maybe Will, you can also relate. I don't know how it goes in Arab countries, but I would say that's something that to be aware of. Since I've begun to move a little bit outside of that bubble, I've learned so much more about all the tensions that are in society here. That at first when I arrived, I was nowhere near aware of any of this, even if it's just from overhearing what people say or catching on the news also in passing. There's just a lot of information that you don't process when you're not from the place.
Thank you. Why don't we ask the room here if you have any questions, since we've taken a few through Zoom. I saw your hand first. Want to ask your question? Make sure to project so we can hear you. Yes.
So I have a question about let's say attending graduate school at a European university, and maybe how that would work like tuition wise, because I'm also an Italian citizen. So I'm a citizen of the European Union, but I'm still technically an American. So how would that like go? Would they consider me an American, or would I be in their eyes an Italian citizen?
That's a great question. Paying for graduate school in another country, it could be very different. I guess this is most appropriate for Corrado, since you actually went to graduate school in Hungary. Do you want to try answering that question?
Yeah, so this one's actually fairly straightforward, like the taxes one. So they would consider you a European citizen. If you have an EU passport, then you're a European citizen, with just a couple of caveats. There's countries that require you to pay taxes in the country to access the preferential rates for university. So there's a few countries where it's completely free, like Sweden, Germany, Norway, even though it's not in the EU. They also have free university education for EU citizens. So there's quite a few places you can apply to where there's no tuition. You just have to pay your living expenses. CEU is a funny case, actually, because it is a private university and tuition is expensive, but they have really good financial aid programs. So that's how I ended up there. But there's really good opportunities to get an affordable degree in Europe, which is why I ended up going to Europe for a master's degree.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I see a question from our Zoom participants. Frederic, you've had your hand up for a while. Please ask away.
First, thank you guys so much for sharing your experience with us. My question is regarding your experiences here at UF. I was just wondering if you had anything while you were at UF that like stood out and maybe made your experiences abroad easier, or anything that you feel like prepared you well for your future careers.
Yeah, absolutely. Your preparation from UF, the one thing we all have in common is our studies here at UF. Will, do you want to address that question? You've done a lot.
Yeah. First, I would say study abroad was a nice little stepping stone into living abroad. I studied abroad my junior year, and it sort of prepared me. It was a nice sort of prologue into living abroad, because you got a little taste, but you also knew you're going to come back in 5 or 6 months or whatever. And it helped you sort of identify if you did like working abroad before you take the plunge. Besides that, I would just say if you know where you want to live, maybe joining some of the cultural organizations that UF has helps a lot, because UF has a ton. I know that I used to hang out with, what's the group called? Arab Students Association, as well as go to like some of the Lebanese Students Association events, which was super cool. It was like a little window into the culture, and helped make the transition a little bit easier. Besides that, I think just your studies. I mean, when you learn about the countries that you want to go live in, you might have, I remember having these little aha moments for my studies where I'd see what I'd learned in the classroom in real life, like, I know the structural forces behind this or whatever. Yeah.
Thank you. Will, where did you study abroad?
Jordan.
In Jordan. Okay. Excellent. Corrado, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I 100% agree with what Will said. And to that, I would add one thing that's a bit a bit intangible. Actually, two things. The first one is just the liberal arts system of how you study in the US. I think it's, at least compared to Europe, it's very different. The fact that you are used to discussing with people in class and debating opinions and just taking in a topic and thinking about it critically, I think that has been the most important thing. Also because my career is kind of academically oriented, it's really helped to have that background, and I think I felt really well prepared from UF from that perspective. And second, all the opportunities to get practical experience, and a lot of them for me were through the Graham Center, the IFAS internship, the Tallahassee internship program. Yeah, these are really great opportunities to already try yourself out as a professional, get real skills, understand what you like and what you don't like. That's definitely an advice I would give if you have the opportunity to do internships, whether in Florida or abroad. Definitely go for it. That's very, very important.
Thank you. I'd like to give Emma a chance to ask your question. Again, you've had your hand up there for a while. Emma?
I have a question for both Will and Corrado. So between all the countries that you have been to, whether it be Jordan or Lebanon or Ethiopia or the Netherlands, did either of you have any preconceived notions or stereotypes about those places that were shattered once you got there?
Either of you feel free to jump right in.
I think the answer is a lot. It's hard to think of some. I would say maybe Doha, for example. It's not the most shocking stereotype, but you have a stereotype of, let's say, of like the GCC citizen, which you see on TV, which sometimes is proven true in like very ostentatious ways, but then other times is disproven by sort of human-human contact. Besides that, I don't know. Rod, do you have any on your mind?
Yeah, no, it's really tricky. I think you tend to forget, right? When you live in one place for a while, you tend to forget what stereotypes got shattered. Yeah, I mean, it's not like you come with you definitely come with your preconceived notions. Maybe an interesting one. It's just the first one I can think of now. I thought that people in Northern Europe and were people who are just very focused on like work. That's how they're portrayed in pop culture. There are people who like are very squared and they just like work and nothing else. And I think actually Northern Europeans, like especially the Dutch, are very good at enjoying life. People really, they're very square, but like tend to be quite rigid, but the rigidity goes, I want to have friends and I want to have time for my family and I want to have hobbies, and therefore I enjoy my life. I make sure I enjoy my life. It's a different type of rigidity than what I expected. It's not only work.
Very good. Thank you. I think we have a couple more questions from our audience here. Anybody have a question for our panelists? Yes, please. Nice and loud, sorry.
In terms of adaptation and career options, is there any method that you found most useful for deciding which languages to learn, and just what you think is best like along the way?
So in your early career, as you're projecting towards the future and thinking about your end goals, how do you make those decisions with all of the different options out there about languages to learn and regions to study to prepare yourself to meet your goal? Either one of you. Maybe we'll start with Will, if you have a thought.
Yeah. I don't know, Carter, were you about to jump in? I don't want to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's always difficult and it like continues to be difficult. But I think, like Corrado said, a good thing you can do in university is eliminate the things you don't like and find what you do like. So I don't know where you are in your university sort of career right now. I mean, don't panic if you're a senior, it's fine. But if you have the opportunity to sort of join clubs, if you are thinking about being a journalist, write for the student newspaper, do an internship, whatever, that's a good thing to do. But also, think about what you like and try to find a way to make money from that. Try to do that in a way that sustains you. If you find I don't know, development super interesting, do something like Corrado, because that seems super interesting, right? But if you find, if you love writing and I don't know, going into and talking to different people, experiencing different cultures, maybe something like journalism is good for you. I guess my takeaway from that is just sort of focus on not on where you want to be in the future, but the work you want to do, because that'll probably take you to where you want to be. That's my talk.
Thank you, Will. Yeah, Corrado, you looked like you had some answer too.
Yeah, maybe I don't disagree with what Will said, but I think I have a slightly different take on this, and I have been thinking about this a lot because, for instance, I dedicated a lot of time to learning Chinese. I spent 4 years studying at UF, and then 1 year also post UF. I did a study abroad in China. I put a lot of hours into it, and honestly, I've never used it professionally. Never, not a single time. And I don't know to what extent it's helped me move my career forward, but I would not do it any different because it's a process that I've really enjoyed so thoroughly. And let's say in the iceberg of my career, I don't know where it is, but I think it has helped me see the world in a different way, and experience things that I would have not experienced otherwise. If I look at my career now and I think back to UF, the smartest thing would have been to learn French. That would have been a lot more useful for what I do now. But I didn't want to learn French at the time, so it doesn't make sense to want to do that retrospectively. So really, I would say go with what makes you happy. Whatever makes you happy, keeps you interested, would be easier to do. But that's my personal take as someone who finds it very difficult to plan and pre-position. I find that very difficult to do. So I have to really rely on the things that I know that I like. But there's things that you may be learning now that you don't know are going to come handy later on. So, or there are things that you think will come handy and they won't. So I think you should also give yourself the space to explore and spend some time on things that will not pay out and spend some time on things that will.
And Corrado, do you have any goals to, at any point in the future, work in Asia and use your Chinese language skills?
Yeah, nothing concrete. Nothing concrete. So actually, well, the only thing I can say is I'm about to change jobs. So I will move next year. I will work for a development bank from the Dutch state, and I will be in a team that covers Asia. So maybe there's a chance that could come handy, but the China or Taiwan or Malaysia, Singapore, places where there are a good number of Chinese speakers are not covered in the programs that the bank runs, but maybe through collaborations or things like that. So it could be, but I don't have any specific plans.
Another question from Anna.
What are some tips that you all have for seniors that are going to be graduating soon, that are looking for jobs or looking for fellowships? What are some things that helped you or that you learned in retrospect that could have helped?
Okay, so from a different position, instead of the early career plotting a course for the future, people who are seniors and ready to take the plunge into the real world. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think the important thing, if you know you want to go abroad and you know where you want to go abroad, even if you don't know where you want to go abroad, I would think the most important thing is to just get there one way or another. Whether that be through a grad program or through a job or some sort of scholarship. Like let's say language, there's so many opportunities, and UF provides guidance on that. But I think the important thing is to get there, and then once you're there, you can sort of get enmeshed in the network and figure out what you want to do there. And maybe you find out once you get there that, oh, you know what, I don't like this so much, I'm gonna go back. But I know a lot of people that like went abroad and they did an internship, let's say for some NGO, and then that really helped them get a footing. And then they realized, okay, I want to move on from this internship. But because they were already there and they had sort of a basis in the local scene, they were able to transition to something that they realized they wanted to do more, but still within the country. So I think, it's much easier to move back than it is to move there. So just try to find a way to go wherever it is you want to go.
I also to add to that, which I think is really good advice from Will. I found it really helpful to talk to people, people who it's good to even get a mix, like people who are 10 years ahead of you, 5 years ahead of you, 3 years ahead of you, and see where people are. Something that I found maybe not directly helpful, but still encouraging is I talked to a UF alum who was living in Brussels when I was applying for master's degrees in Europe, and she had already been working there. And I thought, okay, she has a somewhat similar profile to mine, and she found a job there, and she was already, she actually, you don't know, people are also excited to talk to you, and she started pointing me to organizations. She put me in touch with people that she knew in Hungary, and there's so much out there that if you don't talk to people, you will never find out. So make use of the network, also of the UF network. Try to connect with people and hear out other people's stories. I think that's really helpful.
Good. And you two are precisely those people, 3 or 4 years out, who people are targeting for strategies and information. Other questions, either from the room or from the Zoom audience? Yeah, I see it here.
How has your experiences abroad and your travels changed your view on your everyday sort of life?
So how have your travels, just how have you grown as a person and the way you look at the world and look at your life because of your international experiences? Is that right? Corrado, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it changes your views massively. I don't know. I think what I can say to that really, the way I think about this is that for me with every move, there's kind of a new part of myself, a new identity that starts being created. I feel different when I speak English than when I speak Spanish, or when I speak Italian, or when I speak Dutch. These are all different persons who see the world slightly different. And it's very difficult to go back to being the one whole single person who hasn't seen all of this, who hasn't lived through all of this. I think all these people will continue to live within you the rest of your life, and you become many pieces. So yeah, I think for some people it's quite difficult to imagine, but it's very possible. It definitely happens.
Very interesting. Thank you. Will, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with what Corrado said about seeing different parts of yourself in different contexts, which is a lot of fun. And when you look back, you'll discover new parts about yourself. think another thing also is living in a foreign place gives you a new look on where you're from. You know, seeing things that exist in your own society in an entirely different context really can help you look critically at your own sort of hometown. Like just something like that happened to me was, you know, living in the Gulf, which is infamous for having a large foreign migrant population. You know, everyone says, oh, you know, it's quite ridiculous, whatever. And there's a lot of labor violations, which, you know, there are. But then it helped me think critically about the way that, you know, new immigrants are treated in our country when it comes to labor rights, etc. And I think it also increases your sort of resilience to uncertainty, discomfort, and because oftentimes living in a new country and a new culture with a new language is just like a constant experience of being outside your comfort zone, you become used to being outside of comfort zone, which is really great for growth, even if it sometimes can be a little unpleasant.
Thank you. It's a great question and really insightful answers. I think we have time for another question. Anybody from the Zoom portion or anyone from the room have another question? Yeah, we have a question back here. Please project.
All right. Well, feel free to take this any direction you want, but what's one thing you've done recently which you're really proud of, but you haven't gotten to speak about it that much?
Good, thank you. Something that you're proud of in your professional or personal life, wherever, whatever you interpret that question. Will, I saw you about to chime in there.
I was just gonna say, does enrolling in the gym count?
Sure.
Yeah, I gotta think on that one for a little bit. Corrado, you have one?
Yeah, Corrado, in your work or your private life, something you're very proud of that you haven't got a chance to talk about. Share it with our group.
Yeah. It's a very good question, actually. I mean, sometimes it's really silly, right? If we're talking about international living, the other week I went to the hairdresser and I only spoke Dutch the whole time, and I was really proud of myself for that because I am so lazy and I find it so difficult to because everybody will speak to me in English. In fact, even if I speak Dutch to people, they will switch to English when they hear that I have an accent. So I felt really proud that I kept the whole conversation going in English the whole time, and sorry, in Dutch the whole time. Maybe it's a silly one, but I came back home very happy to tell my girlfriend that I kept the conversation in Dutch the whole time.
What about accomplishments in your professional life, working with those other countries in your role in the company you work in now? Anything you can pinpoint?
Yeah, maybe I can speak of something. It's been a while now, actually, but I did my first my first travel alone for work in 2019, I think. No, 2020 actually, early 2020. And normally for my work, I have to meet with high-level officials. So basically, anybody one step below a minister is the people that I would normally meet with. And in this type of in my work, we normally go in teams, so I'm never alone, and I'm normally in like a supporting function. And this was the first time that I had a big project and something that I won myself, and I was just going to go myself because what we were offering is that I would go and I would do this work. But it was the first time that I was doing it on my own. And yeah, it was really difficult because it was 2 weeks straight of day-long meetings with high-level officials discussing policy, discussing challenges, and you're trying to really ask the right questions and to try to retain as much information as you can. And of course, in between all of this, you have also not only the cultural distances, but also the political context that you're really trying to grasp as you go, what's sensitive, what's not sensitive, what can you and can you not talk about. And to be honest, I was super nervous the first day. And I mean, the first day I started off on 3 hours of sleep because my flight landed at like 2 in the morning, and then my first meeting was like 8 a.m. So I'm really proud with how I handled that, because the project it's been good. We've kept going for now almost 2 years, and I'm actually in the process of just finalizing that. But I feel quite good about what I've done. Yeah, I think it's something difficult. It's been difficult for me to build the level of confidence that you need to sit with someone who expects a lot from you, and someone who you know that knows a lot and knows a lot more than you in certain regards. So I'm quite proud of that.
Great. Thank you. And let me just say thank you in general for.
You had one question in the chat
Oh.
that I don't think got answered earlier.
Oh, I thought it was answered
I thought so too, but it's actually a little different.
about
than
graduate
question
school.
asked in person.
Okay.
Several
well,
people have asked if it could be answered.
Okay,
but
sure.
privately, so-
Before we wrap up, we do have one more question here from the chat box. And it reads, I have a question regarding the funding of international education, especially for the master's degree. Could you share what the process was of funding your international graduate education? Did you find any scholarships available for international graduate students to help you in that cause?
Yeah, I see that now, and that was a UWC Scholar, so really happy to see UWC Scholars in Graham Center event. Yeah, so I don't have a lot of information in terms of general search. What I can say is that there's a few options out there. CEU is a good option, Central European University. Regardless of where you come from, there's good scholarships available for people from anywhere. So that's a good option to start with. I think in Europe it already helps that from many places you don't have to pay tuition fee regardless of where you're from. Yeah, so that's basically what I can say to start with. In my experience, or to my knowledge, it's quite difficult to get good funding for international graduate students in the US, unless you go for a PhD, which is not what I was looking for. At least, this might be outdated information. This is what I knew back in 2015. If you look at private universities in Europe, there's also good options for funding depending on the topic that you're looking for. There's quite a few out there, like the Hertie School in Berlin. Yeah, and there's a few others out there.
Thank you. Will, do you have any thoughts on this?
No, unfortunately, I haven't applied for these things.
That's okay, different trajectories. Okay, well, I hope that answers the question. And we're past 3 o'clock now, so let me thank everybody who showed up here for your questions, and let me thank our panelists. A round of applause for Zoom participants. All right, so thank you, Corrado. Thank you, Will. I'll be in touch over email, and we wish you a good night over there. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us. Take good care.
Thanks so much
Thank
for
you.
having us.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good